What's up, everyone? Tonight, Jeremy and I are going to be live with Joey Mugleston of Great Basin Serpentarium. He is stuck in traffic and will be here momentarily. But until then, how are you doing, Jeremy?
Uh, I'm exhausted, but I made it to the end of the day, so that's what matters.
So you're in a different room. Is that your home where you're at now, or
Yeah,
work
this is
off?
my house. We have like I don't know what to call this room exactly, but it's like a storage, quiet work area. So I made it down here. Last time I was in my office, my personal work office at my previous job. I don't want to stay at work that late,
Yeah,
so
well,
came here.
I don't blame you. You get able to relax at home. How's the enclosure building going?
That was a process. I'm still not even done. I want to say, I'll do that either after this or tomorrow. It's just finding that free time between work and the new master's program I just started. Um, just finding time. Then I'm trying to find the right light bulbs to get the right temperatures. I've been messing around with three different types. I got some from Amazon. I got some Arcadia light bulbs that are more expensive. So it's just trying to figure out which ones were getting me that perfect temperature gradient and basking spot temperature that I'm looking for.
Now you're having 20 enclosures in one room?
Um, no, that was no. It's five of them down here now, and the other 15 as of right now, we're gonna go in my personal bedroom. So I do like everything in my bedroom. Um, I might be able to finesse another four down here, and well, another three down here. So it'll be eight down here, and math 12 in my bedroom. That's going to happen regardless, but it's just figuring out how many go where.
No, I don't know if are you does it seem like I'm lagging at all or is it on your end?
I'm personally not hearing any lag on my end. Uh,
Must have been
Everything
just
sounds
fine.
perfectly fine. Is it
The
lagging continuously or a little bit?
just randomly the the reason why I asked if you're doing them all in one room, I was curious if that's going to make it harder to control the ambience in the bedroom.
I kind of want it to be warmer. Um, I have the whichever you want to call it down here. So I have the west uh, blotched. Will be going down here momentarily. Starting this Saturday. Keep all of that in my room. I might bring, if I do bring another three cages down here, I'll keep a couple Marukis down here just to see if perhaps having a cooler time of the year helps with breeding them. I'm still uh, getting some of the, fine tuning the process, the breeding process.
Well, it's good to experiment. You know, it's got to at least get somewhat cool in the Indonesia at night.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. 1 second.
Because you were getting previously like upper 60s, right? For nighttime.
Um, yeah, I would say upper 60s, low 70s. The house uses central air, so it stays pretty consistent everywhere. But the basement does get cooler, and especially on the floor. So the plan is to have the blotched on the floor specifically. In the westerns, I'll have on top of the blotched because they can take it a little bit warmer.
Hey, Joey.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
So, we'll jump right into it. How did Great Basin Serpentarium begin?
How to begin? Began. I guess Great Basin itself started about 10 years ago, but I've been keeping reptiles since I was about 6 or 7 years old. I've been keeping lizards, and so I've been keeping them early on. Got interested in seeing if I could pair them, breed them, get them to produce offspring. So that's been a just big interest of mine all growing up. And then when I was in college and got into grad school, I had kind of a side hobby where I just kept a bunch of animals, trying to help keep me sane during grad school. And they kept producing offspring. We kept trading those for other animals, and eventually we had enough that we realized that we needed to move from our basement into a facility, and that kind of began Great Basin about 10 years ago.
Now, your master's, was that in biology by chance?
I skipped a master's. I just went straight to PhD. So I got my bachelor's and I went on to a PhD program. And yeah, it's in biology. Not
Do
reptiles though. I did bugs, so studied
oh,
bugs.
does any of that utilize in what you do today? I know you do some in spiders.
Yeah, it we don't do too much research yet. Actually, some of the changes we're gonna make over the next couple of years, we'll hopefully start doing some research projects again. But the PhD work, I used that. Once I got my PhD, I taught at the university for I think it was 7 or 8 years before I recently stopped doing that. Now I just do Great Basin full time. But yeah, currently we're not doing any research. I guess we're not doing any research yet at Great Basin.
Well, and you got, somewhat research as you're going, you still got your mind, I'm sure, working as you're fiddling with, whether it's, blue tongues or the other projects you work with.
Oh yeah, we're finding new ways of keeping these things, new ways of pairing them. We're collecting data. We've got years and years and years with the data we've collected on just notes on pairing, how long gestation is or incubation on some of the species, how long it takes for the offspring to develop, survival rates, and things like that. We've been collecting quite a bit of data. We're just sitting on it at the moment.
Do you plan on doing anything like book wise with that long term, or?
No immediate plans for that. Most of the stuff we want to just post on our website, just make it easily accessible for people to see and kind of take our notes and build off of that.
Well, no, either way, that's going to be beneficial.
Oh yeah, yeah. We want to make it public. It's going to take a bit of time to put all that online, but eventually we'll make all that public and people can see kind of what we've been doing the last few years.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's kind of hard to find the time to actually do it with maintaining everything in life.
Yep.
So, how has your experience been with the Australian blue tongues?
So Australian blue tongues, we found them actually once we excuse me. Once we started pairing those, we found them to be pretty much like clockwork. And so you just kind of watch for certain patterns, and they've been relatively simple to work with. The Australians have been so far.
Are
Um,
you are
sorry,
you brumating northerns and easterns the same temp, or?
I don't brumate any of them. I don't brumate. Yeah, so my facility does have a natural drop in temperature, and so we do have heat offered year round. The ambient temperature, particularly that at night, dips down about 10 degrees in the fall here. So in Utah, it does get pretty cold. And so our ambient temp does drop. And we do notice similar cycles where they will slow down. They won't eat as much, but they won't actual, actually completely stop feeding. They'll just slow down quite a bit. And so we've actually not been brumating any of them.
I know northerns and stuff, people have done that pretty successfully. I'm surprised you usually regularly produce easterns also.
For a couple of years now, we've done Easterns, yeah.
Yeah. And you just think they adapt over time?
No, I think for some animals, and this goes for just reptiles in general, for some animals there does seem to be a necessary drop in temperature for something like spermatogenesis to occur. So if you're breeding mountain king snakes, if you get those males over a certain temperature, they're not going to produce sperm, and so no matter how many times they lock up their female, you're not going to have success. They need to have that drop to develop sperm. Whereas other animals, they brumate because they have to. They have large ranges, and those that are in the cooler regions, they will brumate. They will survive brumation. And then when they warm up, then they produce sperm, and the season goes on. Blue tongues don't seem to be, at least the species I've worked with. I'm not speaking for blotchies yet because I've not tried them. They seem to be a bit more sensitive, so they might be more like your mountain kings. But as far as I've seen with easterns on the small set we're working with, and northerns, it doesn't seem to be necessary. Again, they will cycle, they will slow down, and you'll notice the males about October, November, they stop feeding. They'll eat very seldomly, and their whole temperament will change. And they won't like slow down for the entire winter or anything. That's kind of when they start kicking on and start pairing. That's usually when we start pairing.
Yeah. Now, your guys' facility, do you have it split up like humid areas to more arid, or is it a big open 2,000 square foot facility?
It's a big open, 3,000 square feet now. But yeah, it's a big open facility, but we have just each cage we try to monitor. So we'll have desert species where we need to keep them as dry as possible, save the nest box. And then we have tropical species where we need to keep them, 60+% humidity. And we just modify the cages to reduce airflow or increase humidity with misting to account for each individual cage. But we don't have it broken off like a tropical room or a desert room or anything like that.
Does it make it harder to manage that way, does it seem, or you got a good system and stick with the system that works?
We could definitely streamline it. There's some changes that we're making to make things a little bit easier to monitor humidity a bit better, because it is kind of tricky, especially with the tropical species. With the Gigas subspecies, you have to be really careful on that, because it is easy in this area for those cages to dry out too quickly and to end up having issues with that. So there are better ways of doing it, better ways we're switching to with better monitoring on that. Not so much in tropical areas, just putting more like misting systems on the cage to help out. So if we don't get there to mist them that day, we don't have to worry about the cages drying out.
Yeah, automation would definitely make your life a bit easier.
A little bit.
Would it be pretty big task to switch everything over, or do you already plan on upgrading?
We are in the works of doing that now, and it's a bit of a pain. There's a lot of enclosures to fix up and change there. Luckily, we can. You have those little misting systems, same ones we use on the dart frogs and things like that, where you can have 5 or 6 cages on the same system, which makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, it's going to be a bit of a task to get everything switched over.
Now, basking temp wise, they're pretty much, for the blue tongues, roughly the same, right?
Yep.
I assume so. Some people will do a little different, I've seen with Indos, but I would imagine if they got a good opportunity range, would be ideal for all of them. Yeah,
that's what we do with ours. We don't have a specific thermostat here. It's exactly 108 degrees under the light. It's more of, they have a hot spot that's probably ranging around 105 to 115, depending on which cage it is, but they have enough room that they can move. And so during the day, you have, upper 70s, low 80s on one end, and then you have that really hot basking spot. And our Indonesians, we'll see basking on their little hides right under the light, warming up just like you see the northerns. Not too much difference in behavior between the two in that regard.
What about humidity wise? And I know you don't exactly monitor it, do you just try to do Gigas in that 60 to 80, or?
Yeah, so Gigas, here, the bad part about Utah is things like cypress mulch that tend to work so well in every other state I've talked to people in, that state I've lived in. Cypress mulch work perfectly. We can't use that well here because it dries out, just gets really dusty, because it's so hard to keep humidity up in those enclosures. So we just, with the Indonesians, we put them on a different substrate. We use that cocoa bark, or in some cases we use soil mix, like a bioactive soil mix for them. And in those, we just try to keep that just slightly damp, not soggy or anything like that, but try to keep that slightly damp. And we go through and try to spray them, try to mist the cages at least once a day during the week when we're there. So that's the best way we have so far of doing it. Of course, the northerns are so much easier. We can keep them on aspen, and then if they're in shed, we'll give them a little mist there, or once a week we'll go through and spray their enclosures. But yeah, the Indonesians are a bit trickier. Different substrate and just heavier misting seems to be a good way of keeping them out here, though.
I'm in Minnesota, so we're similar. Ours can get a bit dusty. I wonder if we had a different quality of mulch at our location. We use just the cypress 100% at Menards. And it can get dusty, but it's not horrible.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe different quality. We have trouble getting it out here too. It's just to get it in. I was having it. Other people that go down to Arizona, they'd pick up truckloads. I just piggyback on their orders, but we can't run down to the hardware store or the lumber stores here to get cypress mulch. We have to order it in specifically, and maybe just the quality there. When I was down in California for a bit, though, go grab cypress mulch. All the blue tongues, Northerns and Indos were there, and just fine on it. But we bring it back here, we just end up getting cake stuff around the mouth and the eyes, and just it's a problem. So. Cocoa bark seems to be a bit better. The soil's a nice mix too. Either of those seem to work fairly well.
Early on with the Indos, where you primarily had all wild caught then, they bit harder to get cycled in, or
maybe we were still just in general figuring out blue tongues when we started with the Indonesian. We just happened to have Indonesian at the same time, and so a lot of it was still kind of guesswork, trying to figure out. You have 7 or 8 different people doing it 7 or 8 different ways, and trying to figure out what are the common trends that they're all doing. And so we did have pretty much all wild caught Indonesian stock, like our Gygus, Evanescens. They were all wild caught. And they did seem to be a bit off season from the Northerns, but by the time we really started figuring out how to watch for those seasons, it seemed to be just about a month or 2 ahead of our captive bred Northerns in terms of their cycle.
Do you remember how long you had them before you started reproducing the Gygus?
I think 2015 is when we really figured out how to watch for those patterns and how to really hone in on that and get them going. So I think 2015 is the start of when we had. I think we had the Aryan Giants, the Gygus, Northerns that year, and then the next year we had Merauke and Keys the next year as producing those. But I think 2000. Northerns I've had for years before that. I've been keeping Northerns since the late 1990s. But the Indonesians, I think 2010 to 2012 is when I started picking those up, and then 2015 is when we started producing those.
Do you remember who you got your Northerns from back in the 90s?
Oh, my very first one, there was a pet store down in Vegas. So I saw one a few years before, and I fell in love with them. I saw someone did a presentation. They had a blue tongue. They mentioned that they're these rare Australian lizards, and they're really expensive. And I just, had to have one. Went down to a reptile show down in LA. Couldn't afford one, so I ended up getting a monkey tail skink at that show. And then a couple years later, I was down in Las Vegas, and at one of the pet stores there, they have a pet store that had a bunch of exotic reptiles, exotic mammals, and they had one in the enclosure there, and I'm picking it up. Exotic Pets in Las Vegas, where I got my first one from. And then early 2000s,
Forgive me, one second.
There was a couple breeders. I cannot remember their names. I have it. I have them all in my database. I can see all the old records where we got things from, but there were a few breeders that were around online in the late 90s that I just kind of find them online and order a blue tongue from, but I'd have to look up the names. It's been a while.
All right, I just wasn't sure if it was some of the ones that were still around, like Ray and James, or if it were some of the ones that have come and gone throughout the years.
Yeah, I think. No, we didn't pick up. I was thinking of these caramels. We didn't pick up caramels till like 2012 or so. So that would be a little later with Andrew on those. But yeah, we were getting from a few different sources. Let's see. Again, that pet store in Vegas, Ken at Exotic Pets, he would when he was around, he'd get these things in from all over. He'd work with different zoos and stuff. So he had some stuff that came from zoo stock from, someone was saying Honolulu Zoo, is what I think. I got to check my records again and see on that. But just from all over, we're just trying to find blue tongues. But yeah, I can't remember. I'd have to look at my database to see the names of who we got them from.
Sorry about that. I was having some technical difficulties. I'm trying to make the best of what I can work with currently, so I'm using my cell phone rather than my laptop. You mentioned that the majority of everything Gygus-wise that you had was wild caught initially. Mm-hmm. Outside of animals that you produced yourself, did you start to work with any captive bred animals from anyone else, or was everything strictly from your own original animals?
With Merauke, I've been able to get from other people. So Evanescens, I've been able to pick up a few other captive bred ones. As for Keys and even like Tannenbars, I've not been able to acquire any other bloodlines. I've not found anyone else producing keys in the States that I can get them. I find some captive born ones, but that's the best I've been able to do with Holmes, keys, and even Tannies on that one.
Mm-hmm.
As for the Gygus, I've not been able to acquire any other bloodlines than what we've had. And so just over the years, if an importer gets some endos in, I just try to get there as quickly as possible and try to grab some to just diversify as best as possible.
Yeah. Okay.
The desire is there, it's just the opportunity has not been.
Yeah.
Were those from shows or just randomly here and there throughout the years?
The let's see, keys were at shows. People knew I liked weird blue tongues or knew I liked weird lizards, and so they'd come up and say, "Hey, I got this a year ago. I don't know what I'm doing with it. Do you want these?" And so my 3 original keys were that. Someone came up to me at the end of an expo. They just figured I liked weird lizards, so I might be interested, and they handed me 3 adult male keys. Ended up picking those up from them, and then building off of that as we tried to get more in our key project. But sometimes from shows, sometimes I just have a couple of the distributors that we will sell spiders and other reptiles to. I just tell them I'm on the lookout for them. If they see them, just let me know, and they'll sometimes send me a message, say these came in, and send me pictures. And if it's a healthy looking Gygus, I try to grab it, or healthy looking key, I try to grab it. So a little bit from all over.
Well, and building those contacts throughout the years, you get that nice network to randomly get stuff here and there.
Mhm.
You've yet to reproduce the Holmes, correct?
Yeah, I thought this was going to be the first year. We saw a pairing. The 2 females had marks on them, so we knew that both females were being mated with, and nothing. So almost, maybe next year. But yeah, Holmes we've not done yet.
Do you have any insights on breeding them? But since you've yet to get them yourself, it might just be don't give up.
Yeah, that seems to be the Indonesian blue tongue method there. Just keep trying. If it seems to be working, just maybe give it a bit more time. I've had some interesting experience with Holmes. Just they're interesting. They behave a lot more like the keys when it comes to mating. They're a lot more aggressive than most of than even for Indonesians go. The Holmes seem to be pretty aggressive with mating. And so that's been a bit of a pain. We've had a couple issues where a male's just getting too aggressive. We just had to call the season off early because he was just being too vicious toward the females. You'd see the tail wag, you'd see the chasing, and then he'd just go after a leg and go after a tail tip and twist or something like that. And so they're a bit trickier.
Do you have a good enough group, or do you have a select group of Holmes where some of it's that the males might be more finicky?
I'm not sure yet. Give me a few more seasons and ask me on that one.
Okay.
The group I have now, I think, is getting along fairly well. We're kind of breaking the rules with the Holmes. They are the one blue tongue group that I have that cohabs year round. Because we're just trying to figure out. I know it does not make sense. I just mentioned they're the most aggressive breeders, but these 3 seem to be doing okay. And yeah, it's the only blue tongues that we keep in groups. Yeah, we've tried a few different setups with larger pits and northerns and just didn't like the results there. And we've actually kept Gygus back in the early 2000s. We kept those in groups all the time. No one even questioned it. We just had a large enclosure with about 5 or 6 different classic endos running around in there. But the Holmes we have now, they do live in a group together. And again, the only time we ever see them interacting is around that. A few weeks from now, basically, we'll start. So late September, early October, we start seeing the mating behavior, and it becomes a waiting game that this year didn't pan out, but maybe this next season. Yeah, I'm not sure on Holmes. I have not figured that one out yet. They're a bit tricky, and it might just be my group. It might be there's just some little trigger that we haven't figured out yet with them.
You're closer than most, that's for sure, if you've already had locks. Why do you think most people or so few people have success with the various Indonesian subspecies?
Not sure. I think maybe not just Indonesians, but just reptiles in general. I think a lot of keepers try to overthink it. They forget these animals have been doing this for a long time without our help. And so they try to get too finicky with parameters and say, you have to do exactly this, exactly that, instead of meeting the animal's needs and letting the animals do kind of what they do. You read their care sheets and say, okay, they breed from this time to this time. And Indonesians, this is the rainy season, so this one they have to be breeding. without much thought of perhaps they're on an annual cycle and just watch for the patterns of the animal. When the male stops eating, usually that's a sign that testosterone levels are shooting up. He couldn't care less about his appetite. He's got other things on his mind. So watch for the feeding pattern of the male. And then also the female, she'll start eating more heavily. She'll start building more. And so kind of watch them, read the care sheets, read about the natural history of the animals and what it's like in the natural environment, but use that as your starting point to say, okay, what are the common things that we're watching for? Not so much, it's October 15th, this is the day we pair. It's more of, male stopped eating about 2 weeks ago. Let's put them together, see the response. Okay, he's just chasing her. Let's give it a couple weeks. Let's try it again. And then once you start seeing the behaviors, the patterns, they're like, watch for that. And that's going to be possibly the biggest, as of right now, that's kind of what we use as our biggest key is it's time to go or it's not time to go. Just kind of watch them.
This one doesn't have to be necessarily the Halms or anything. Have you ever noticed like a time of day that males are more eager? I haven't really with Northerns, but
no, they're pretty much whenever. So we have these what are they, 50-gallon Rubbermaid like little ponds that I kind of wheel in the breeding season and I fill with substrate. That's where we pair them. And some days I get there in the morning and I'm pairing them first thing in the morning and things are good. Sometimes it's in the evening. Sometimes it's late at night. I'm just putting them late night in at the facility and figure might as well get a few more pairings in. And so I've not noticed any pattern of time of day, as long as it's not, middle of the night. I guess I've not tried middle of the night, but maybe then too. But as far as normal hours during the day, we've not noticed any pattern with any of the species, morning, midday, evening, anything like that.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't suggest trying at night. But yeah, the female might not be the biggest fan, but that's some females in general. They don't like it when you wake them up.
Yeah. Oh, not that comment, but actually something just popped in my head when you asked a minute ago about struggling with the Indonesians. Another thing that the Menarche is not as bad, but a lot of the Indonesian species, what you would typically consider a scary pairing with a Northern, that's your everyday pairing with Indonesians. Like with my keys, when I put my keys together, if my Northerns behaved even remotely like my keys do, I would have pulled them apart and said, we're trying to get in a week. There's a lot more chasing. There's a lot more biting. There's not thrashing about, none of that stuff. So you see that, you're in trouble. Separate them. But there's a lot more chasing, a lot more biting. They're a lot more aggressive in mating than the Northerns are. So the female will be doing the tail wiggle, but at the same time trying to bite the male back. And so you got to watch them closely, but expect it to be a lot more aggressive than what you see with any of your Australian species. Just figure I'd throw that in there.
Do you have a theory on why?
I'm not sure. I was at first thinking maybe it's just a fluke with the first few keys and Indo pairings we were doing. The first classic Indos and the key pairings we're doing, I thought just a fluke with them, but it seems to be across the board. Just every year we've noticed that different pairings we're noticing that. Even this last year with the keys, the keys we produced this year, that pairing that produced that, the male chased the female around for probably a good 20+ minutes. And again, if it was a Northern doing this, I would have separated them quite a bit earlier. But they chase. She'd still do the tail wiggle, and she'd still do receptive poses. And so we just left them together and let it continue, and just watched for anything to get too out of hand. But now I have no idea at this point as to why they'd be so much more aggressive with each other.
It could be something we can't easily test or see ourselves, whether it's like hormone levels or something like that.
Yeah. Maybe just the strongest, grumpiest males were the ones fast enough to catch the females, and so their offspring carry that trait too. So could just because.
What are your thoughts on keeping babies with adults for the first few months, whether Indos or Australians?
I'm curious about it. I've seen more talk about that again. So the hobby tends to go in cycles. And so everything with co-having blue tongues, it was let's give it a shot, at least as far as US hobbyists go, because across in Australia, people keep them in groups quite a bit. But in the US hobby, it was all keep them in groups, breed them in groups. And then as people got more into blue tongues, it was never let them see each other unless they're mating. And now you see it kind of shifting back a bit. People thinking, well, maybe we can if we have a large enough enclosure, enough visual barriers. Same thing with the babies. It's okay, look at keep them together. The babies are there. Maybe there's some parental care. And then there was a big gap where it's the second those babies pop out, you're wiping the fluid off of them because you got to get them out there right away. And now I'm seeing people kind of shift back to, well, mom's probably not going to eat the babies. Why not leave them in there? We do with our other skinks. So our zebra skinks, our Gidgee skinks, our monkey tail skinks, the babies hang out with mom for quite a bit. Not so much as zebras. You got about a week to get them out of there before mom gets hungry. But most of the other skinks, they let them sit there for a bit, and there's not really any aggression. I don't think it's necessary. I don't know if they're going to get anything from it. It's more probably just an artifact of when the babies are born, they just don't need to run off that quickly. And so they just kind of hang out there. So I don't know if it's a problem, if it's going to benefit anything, but I'm curious to see where it goes. Like I said, the hobby's talking about a lot more. So I'm curious to see what happens over the next few years as more people give it a shot.
Some are claiming already there's a benefit that I wonder might be more anthropomorphized, that it's not really that the mom's benefiting from it for the couple months, and they would, because I've had moms calm down pretty quick once you remove the babies, for example, and it doesn't really seem to stress them out too much, especially long term.
Mm.
Whereas they claim longer with the mom reduces her stress.
So for me to, I guess, make a decision on that, it would require a bit more information. For example, are we looking at, when we determine stress, are we basing that off of behavior, off of mom's response? Are we basing that off of things like cortisol levels in mom's blood? And so are we actually looking at mom's blood and saying, okay, with the babies here, cortisol levels remain low, the stress hormone levels remain low, but if you take the babies away, stress hormones go up through the roof. And so until we have data along those lines, I'd be hesitant to take a side. I'd be skeptical on any claims made for or against it. We do have data on some things. Like, for example, we know that on herbivorous reptiles, babies eating the fecal matter of adults means they get that gut fauna, and they need that gut fauna to help break down the plant matter. So with monkey tails, they follow mom and dad around. They eat the fecal matter. They get the bacteria in their gut that helps them be much more efficient on processing their food. With blue tongues being omnivores, whether or not those gut fauna are even present, and with our captive bred lions, if our captive bred animals even still have that, since we have been separating them from mom so early, there'd be questions there that would have to be answered before I'd be able to say, yeah, this is helping either with gut fauna, this is helping with stress levels. There's a lot of claims being made, but we don't really have any data to back any of it up at this time. At least that I'm aware of. If there are data out there, please let me know. I'd love to see it.
I believe it's more observation than measuring cortisol or anything like that.
But if the mom's not eating it, then if the moms aren't hurting the babies, then maybe it's not hurting anything. So I'm sure as hobbies go, it's probably going to turn into some pretty big fights online about it. But yeah, if mom's not eating the babies and you're content leaving them together, then I don't see too much a problem with it if there's enough space for them to move around and things like that. But whether or not there's any benefit from it, I guess we'd have to wait and see on that.
Diet wise, do you do anything different between the Indos and Northerns?
Technically, no. I mean, it's the same batch of food we make for them. The only difference is I've noticed the males, when they go off feed, the Indonesians are more likely to take like a fuzzy mouse or a high protein, an animal protein meal better than, say, the Northerns. So when the males are in the height of the season, they're not eating much. Northerns will still eat the same mix. The Indonesians sometimes will turn their nose up to that normal mix we give for weeks on end. And so when that happens, we just give them a frozen thawed fuzzy mouse or something like that, and they tend to take that a bit better. But that's really the only difference, not a major difference, and they probably don't even need it. It's just if they're being finicky during the breeding season, Indos tend to take rodents a little bit better than the Northerns. I guess not better, but they'll take rodents, whereas the Northerns will still eat the typical mix.
So what I've noticed different for mine, my males normally won't. There'll be a few that will like maybe eat a meal or two before they're in the mood.
Mm-hmm.
But then like talking to, say, TC, neither his males or his females will eat really until after they're bred. So I don't know if it's something more we're doing, whether maybe mine are a little cooler, and since we're more brumating them actually versus you're doing all year round heat might change also.
Oh yeah.
What about the various localities in Gigas? Do you think they're true localities? Maybe some could be subspecies, intergrades?
So, um, species are a fun topic, because we know we're all taught. You take your biology class, you're taught what a species is, and you all learn about the biological species concept. If they mate and produce offspring in nature, they're a species. It's so much more of a complex topic. I had an entire lecture that I gave my students about how everything you think about a species is not. We don't really, if you get a group of biologists together and ask them to define species, they're all going to fight as to how we should define what a species is. And there's a large number of us out there that think that the whole concept of a subspecies is just kind of silly. You're either a species, you're that fundamental unit of evolution, or you're not a species. And so with subspecies, I treat them kind of like, I've got my Gigas. It's a particular locale, a particular phenotype, a look, a somewhat isolated gene pool. But if it's separate from the homes, like if there's a chunk of ocean dividing you, then you're separate populations, and we should treat them as if they're separate. I think I digressed so much I kind of forgot the question. Line. Oh, well, remind me the question again. I think I tangent too far.
Your thoughts on subspecies versus localities in the Indonesian subspecies and/or localities?
Okay, cool. So I was kind of on the same track. Yeah. So the subspecies and even the different islands, I treat them as all being separate, not as if they have to be separate species, because we might get more information as time goes on. So if you know it comes from a separate locale, a separate island, I would keep it as a separate captive population from the others. So like your different classic Indos, right? The different islands now, and people saying this comes from that island, this comes from that island. The way I look at it is these might be unique populations, and let's keep them as unique as possible. There's a downside to that, because we may be bottlenecking populations that in the wild aren't naturally bottlenecked. We're saying, okay, this is unique, and so we're going to keep them separate, isolating that gene pool from this one, when in the wild, those two populations may actually still have a bit of a gene flow between them, just depending on where they're from. Another issue I have, though, too, is the hobby's not exactly honest where things are coming from. So you'll get something from an exporter, and it might say it came from Jakarta, but that's just where the export facility is. They may have caught that somewhere completely different. We see this with varanids all the time. You'll have a certain species, and they say, okay, this is a mangrove monitor, but there are so many different islands out there, and each one has its own unique phenotype of mangrove monitor. And so it's not technically Varanus indicus, but the exporters, to them, it's indicus. For their export permits, they need to put a species on there, it's indicus. Same thing with blue tongues. And so you have these different exporters saying, oh yeah, it was collected here, but whether or not it was actually collected on that island, or the party that was collecting animals stopped by that island at some time, it's kind of hard to say. So without actual details about the wild populations, I'm somewhat hesitant to mix locales, or to really mix the phenotypes too much. I would try to keep them as separate as possible and treat them as if they were their own unique species, their own unique genetic line, however you want to look at it.
And even identifying animals by the individual territory, region, island, without knowing, especially if it was imported, without knowing directly where it came from, it's hard to label it something. From
Yeah, we've actually had a few Indonesians come through here where I'm looking at this animal, that, okay, it's supposed to have come in from this order, it's supposed to be from this island, but it looked unique enough and it was different enough that we were hesitant to add it to our breeding project. We actually would, find a friend that wanted a neat pet, saying, I'm not sure if this is from a farm out there in Indonesia, where it's maybe even an integrate or a hybrid of different species. I'm not sure what this is, so we're not going to risk mixing it, because even though they say it came from, this is this Western Papuan locale, like, we're not entirely sure, and it looks different enough that we don't want to risk it. So again, that might be natural variation. That's, again, the flip side to what I'm saying is we could be isolating populations, inadvertently bottlenecking populations that we don't need to, because that diversity is out there. But since we don't know enough about what's out there, we just say, okay, that's aberrant enough, that's unique enough, it may be something else, I don't want to risk it. Thereby, taking that entire genetic line out of the whole population. So it's not a foolproof strategy, but it's I think a bit more conservative one for now. And if we find out that we're wrong and they are more diverse, then we can add more stuff in later. I guess it's easier to add bloodlines in than it is to take mixed bloodlines out. So
yeah, once they're mixed in, you can't really easily take them out.
Yeah. do your best, as we were trying with some of the Australian monitors. But once it's done, it's done.
What about breeds? I heard another podcast, someone was talking about it, where they're basically, turning the reptiles kind of like dog breeds instead of line breeding, inbreeding, trying to create new breeds, so to speak.
I think we do that in the hobby on accident, on purpose. I guess I can't really speak for the intent of it, but we tend to do that. And you see that in the blue tongue hobby as well. Where someone will have an amazing color or pattern, and then suddenly everybody wants that, and they start selecting for that, whether from those lines or inadvertently from other lines. Like, okay, maybe a few years ago, dark blue tongues, everybody wanted dark northerns, and so everyone found their darkest northern males and females. They paired those. They tried to get, I think there's a few different nicknames for them out there. A few years before that, it was the caramels or the sunsets and sunrises. Nice thing with blue tongues, there's enough breeders out there that not everyone's doing the exact same thing, and people are mixing things together. And so there's still going to be enough mixing there that I don't think we're going to quite get to the problem that we see with domestic dogs. But there are some lines that do get, I keep saying bottleneck, but I guess that's a proper term for it, do get bottlenecked. And so you do start seeing a lack of diversity in those lines. Again, I don't think we're going to get to the point we see with domestic dogs, and hopefully not the point of the problems that we see with domestic dogs, but you are starting to see a few lines like that pop up. I don't want to call them breeds. I'd just say, these different lines, because they are, again, still being mixed quite a bit. I guess personal opinion on that.
Yeah, and I'll have to find the link to share to you. They probably describe it a lot better than I did, but, it was still interesting to think about. Enclosure guidelines, what about those? I know those have had to change a lot throughout the years. What do you recommend now for blue tongues?
My go-to is at least 4x2 foot per individual. But I mean, a lot of us, we've been keeping them in rack type enclosures, and so a CB70 was the kind of the go-to. If you had a lot of blue tongues, you kept them in CB70s. We still have a few in racks that we're in the process of moving over into larger cages, because that was just kind of, we all did in CB70s. Then it was 4x2s, and now people are recommending 5x2. I guess it depends what you're doing. If you are a breeder of blue tongues, you have basically a blue tongue farm. You're probably going to keep them slightly differently than someone who has a single blue tongue. And so if you have a pet blue tongue, don't buy a rack and put it in a rack. If you have a pet blue tongue, get a larger enclosure. 4x2, 5x2 seems to be the kind of the go-to size that a lot of the companies are making now. Something that size, I think, would be ideal for all but your largest northern Dromaeosaurus. If you are a breeder, you are going to have to fit more in a smaller space, and so there's going to be a little bit different caging guidelines there. But we try to, or at least try to put most of ours in 4x2s.
I think that's a great way to put it, and it seems overall, the whole community's trying to improve as we go, upgrading, whether it's, this section this year, and, keep doing better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry.
Have you tried importing any Indonesian blue tongues from Indo yourself?
I have not. We've have so many things going on. We have over 350 different species in our facility now. And so importing just seems like another headache that I'm not ready to ever try. And so I just will go to others that I know are importing and say, hey, if you can get me these, here's kind of my wish list. If you can piggyback on one of your imports, let me know. And so we have a handful of people we know that do import, and I've asked them. So far, we haven't got too many in the way of blue tongues, just because there's not. But the stuff that they're importing, blue tongues aren't really a high priority for them, and so it's just more of, if you accidentally come across this, please let me know. But no, I've not tried doing that myself yet. I've not had the time or desire for that headache yet.
Are a lot of those species spiders? I didn't realize 300. That's crazy.
About 250 species, over 250 species of spiders, a little over 100 species of reptiles right now, I think. Over 100 species of reptiles. Maybe a little bit more than that.
It's a lot.
Yes. There's a few of them in there.
Individual animals, not just species.
I start doing the individual animals, it gets kind of overwhelming to think about. So
Yeah.
So how do you manage the diversity then?
So a lot of records. No, now I have a crew of people that help me take care of the animals, help me feed and water and do cage cleans and things like that. Up until 2019, 2020, it's just my wife and I doing it. And then we started bringing people on board around, when was that? It would have been 2020. We started bringing people on to help with the day-to-day care, the feeding, watering, cage cleans, all that fun stuff. But yeah, we have a whole lot of checklists that you have to go through. So you grab a checklist and start knocking off things each day, and by the end of the week, make sure everyone gets the care that they need.
Is it hard managing that many people, or you got a good crew?
Got a good crew. Taking care of the animals is much easier than managing people. Managing people is kind of a necessity at this time. Not something I would have preferred to have done. That's not really where I find a whole lot of passion or anything like that. But it's necessary to keep the number of animals that we have now, so it makes it worth it.
Is there, at a certain point, does adding more become counterproductive?
Sure it could. There's a few projects as we go through and look and we see kind of how the hobby changes and how our interests change. That we'll look and say, okay, we have a lot of these and we should probably get them in the hands of someone who's more dedicated or more gung-ho about, keeping and breeding this species. And so we have some pet projects that are there just because we really like them, and there might be something better we could put in that spot, but we really like them, so they get to stay.
Well, it makes sense to keep it if you still enjoy it.
If I may, if we can go back to husbandry briefly, because of the multiple technical difficulties that I had, what do you do for your skinks in regards to diet? Is it all the same throughout the year? Does it differ per species?
Same throughout the year, same for most species. I did mention, I don't know if you cut out that time, but for the male Indonesians, if they go too long without a meal, we'll give them a frozen thawed fuzzy or frozen thawed hopper. Just that seems to get their appetite going a bit more during the breeding season if they're being extra picky. But we do the same diet throughout the year for all different sizes and all different species. We don't switch it up between babies and adults or anything, or breeding adults and just maintenance adults. That has changed quite a bit over the years too. So in the late 90s, it was all just dog food or cat food. You grabbed a thing of science diet, you cracked it open. They used to have these little chunks with gravy around it. We'd love watching the blue tongues eat that up and then use their big old tongues to lap up the gravy when they're done. And that was a blue tongue diet. And then as we start learning a bit more, it's like, okay, that's probably not the best diet for them. And so we started adding more things to it, some fruits and veggies as treats. Now our diet consists of about 60%, or at least 60%. So in a bind, if you run out of veggies, just do 100% of this. But at least 60% is a low grain, just high quality canned dog food. And then we do about 30% chopped greens, veggies. So we'll get, just the frozen mixed veggies. We'll get mixed greens, chop those up. And that makes up to about 30%. And about 10% or up to 10% can be fruit. So that 60% with dog food will sometimes mix in like Missouri omnivore pellets or something like that to just give some variety to it. But about 60% protein, about 30% veggies, and about 10% fruit.
Okay.
Was there any more husbandry ones you wanted to ask Jeremy before?
You went over passing temp, enclosures, diet. No, that's it for me.
How has the market been overall, and is there major differences in demand between blue tongue species?
Oh, overall. So like any market, it kind of has its ups and downs. Over the last 4 or 5 years, no more than that, probably last 6 or 7 years, the popularity has just exploded on these guys, but so has the number of people producing them. And so the last couple of years, we've seen the price come down as more breeders are producing things like northerns. The market's been pretty steady though. They're such a good pet lizard. They're such an easy to care for, such a just enjoyable animal to keep, that as the price comes down, there's more people that are willing to get into the species, keeping the species. And so the market's been pretty strong on these for last decade or so easily. But I guess before that, but I wasn't breeding before that. resin breeding blue tongues before that. But yeah, market's been pretty good on them.
Do you see a lot of people that get Indonesians more so getting pets, or do you see some getting into breed?
The Indonesians aren't as popular, and in some cases it might be somewhat price based on that, because we do charge more for the Indonesians, mainly because I would rather see them get in the hands of people who are serious about breeding them than taking the few captive bred ones and just becoming a lone pet in the collection. If they're more common, then I'd probably feel a little bit different about it. But with the Indonesian ones, typically it's our target is to find other breeders that want to get involved with that. A lot of the times with Indonesians, though, a lot of our Indonesians that we have, current ones that we have in our collection, came about because people wanted a pet blue tongue. Northerns were too expensive because the captive bred babies cost more than their wild caught imports. And so they go to the pet store, they grab that, $100 to $200 import. They keep it for a few months, realize after losing 3 or 4 toes that this was not the blue tongue for them. And usually that's when we get a call and say, hey, I've got a 16-toed blue tongue. Do you want to trade me for a northern? And so we'll try to actually get those out of the beginner collector's hands and get them into a northern that they'll be happy with and a lot easier to care for, and we get our breeding stock that way. So I guess going back to the original question, the Indonesians are popular pets because they cheap imports. And so as long as those cheap imports stay around, Indonesians are going to be a sought after thing. As for our captive bred Indonesians, the price point makes it so that it's typically other breeders that are contacting us trying to get those and trying their hand at those.
It does seem, though, overall you have more educated people, that you might still find the diehard pet keeper that wants to give that Indonesian a great home, that's gonna just do everything it needs.
Oh yeah, and we meet a few of them each year. They'll contact us and say we want one of these. We know there's the captive bred ones, the wild caught ones that are sometimes going quite a bit cheaper, but they want to do support captive breeding, but they want to just start off on a better foot. Want to make sure that they weren't going to have any of the issues. Like homes tend to be little time bombs. You get them in and they look fine, and about 9 months later they just crash for absolutely no reason. You try what you can, and they're gone after about 8 or 9 months. You get them past that point, even the wild caught ones tend to be fairly doing well for themselves. But we'll have collectors that don't really want to breed them. They just want a healthy Indonesian animal. They're going to do a really good job of keeping it, and they don't mind the difference in price because they just want that unique, captive bred specimen of that species that they prefer. So yeah, you get those each year. We see people like that coming through.
Why do you think they do crash? Just the parasite load from the wild caught ones, the amount of time from Indo here with no water dehydrating them?
That would be kind of a combination of factors. Would be my best guess. Again, I haven't done enough necropsy or anything to really have enough data to say for sure what it is. But my guess would be that when they get shipped over here, it's not really, there's not a lot of consideration in most cases. I'm not speaking for every importer, but in a lot of these situations, these animals are not really, the long-term survivability of these animals isn't really in question. It's more of getting them there as fast as possible, as many there as fast as possible. And so if you're at the bottom of that pile, you're getting all the fluids of everything else kind of piling up on you. You're coming in contact with a whole bunch of different parasites that in the wild you wouldn't be coming in contact with that much all at once. So it could be parasite load. It could just be dehydration, and just the damage to the internal organs just isn't seen that quickly. It's not something that's going to kill them overnight. So they get to the importer, they get to the distributor, they get to the pet store, they get into your home, and it just takes a few months for their bodies to really start showing signs of how badly they were damaged in transit. But I would venture to guess that it has to do with internal parasites, dehydration, and just overall stress levels during transit. But again, we need to gather some data on those to find out why. But it does seem to be about an 8 or 9 month window that you have where they look fine and then just tend to tank.
Well, and kind of why I wanted to ask that is, anyone listening that might want one as a pet, that's part of the reason why you have that, extra surcharge. The wild caught ones, you're going to have possible vet treatments and who knows what, or even worse, you might lose the animal.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed the metabolic bone disease more in Australians versus Indos, or in Indos versus Australians?
The evanescent subspecies is the one I've noticed that the most, where they seem to be more sensitive to it. All the ones that we've had, that seems to be the one that we watch the closest for early signs of it. Even with captive bred babies, you'll have a litter of 13 of them and they all look fine. You'll notice one of them just looks to be a bit off. And if you feel the jaw, it doesn't really feel that soft, but you see the movements look to be a bit off. I've noticed that more in the Manaukis than I have in any of the others so far.
Going to the Indo species, the classic Indos, the Gygus gygus, I see that you have different color forms, you could say. Like I've seen some that are more yellow, some that are more like whitish. Have you noticed? And I've seen sometimes those breed. Have you noticed? Not that it's necessarily recessive or dominant trait, but a yellow and yellow animal produces yellow babies. Yellow and white produces a mix of both. Anything along those lines?
So the white male that I have, the white classic Indo that I was pairing this last season, he's actually a captive bred baby I produced in 2015 from two very classic yellow parents. Mm-hmm. And so I've noticed even from two yellow parents within the same litter, you'll see a bit of variety there. And then back when we were getting more imports in the early 2000s, you'd see more yellow individuals, more green individuals, more gold individuals. I'm thinking just variation within the species. But I've not noticed any kind of predictable ratios of the babies, but we just don't have quite enough of them yet to really say that for sure.
Okay. I had a female that I had purchased from an expo, and it had looked gravid, and I saw it breathing. So I bought it, on the, betting that it was gravid. It did produce babies for me. And it was a yellow female, and the babies, some of them came out orange. One of them came out like a brownish white, so neither of the babies that lived longer looked like the mother at all. So I just found that to be interesting.
Yeah, I don't see as much diversity in I think we're calling them ambons now in the hobby, but your classic endos, like the ones we have pictured up here, I don't see as much diversity in the hobby as what we saw in the past. Again, that might just be a reflection of we just don't see as many of these floating into the hobby as we used to, and so we're just not seeing that full sampling. But as for the babies, it tends to, from what we've seen on the few litters we've had, they just tend to vary a bit, usually within the range of the parents, but every once in a while you get a funky one in there.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying before about the localities, but you did bring it up as a preface, the word ambon, that locality. What's your thoughts on the usage of ambon versus for the classic Indos, or classic Indos rather than ambon for Tiliqua gygus specifically?
Again, my hesitation on putting locales on there is the uncertainty as to where they really came from. And so you can have exporters swear that these came from Sarong, these came from Ambon, but if you weren't, and there's so many steps along the way to get it to that exporter, if you weren't there along the whole process, there should be a healthy dose of skepticism when someone tells you where something like that came from. And so I prefer classic Indo, and if it's outside the range that we've seen coming in, like within a single shipment, I am hesitant to say it's from the same region. But as for putting an exact sticker on it saying this is from this region, this from this locale, I'm extremely hesitant to do so on that. I think at that point, it might as well just put some quotation marks around it, and that is our Ambon form that we call in the hobby. Whether or not it represents the blue tongues on Ambon or Sarong, that's just kind of, it may not, and that uncertainty makes it so that if you say it's a Sarong blue tongue, for me it's a Sarong in quotation marks, and we just call anything that looks like that a Sarong blue tongue. Mm-hmm. We see the same thing with the green tree pythons. You have all these locales associated with green tree pythons. People swear, this is what they look like in that region, but it's kind of just it's a hobby trend. So we say this is a Kofiau localities. If this is a Kofiau, it's because it has a certain look, not because we necessarily can trace the adults back to that area, because there's a whole lot of gaps in between that snake being collected, or captive, hatch, whatever you're going to claim it is, from that snake being collected and that ending up in the hobby. There's so many steps along the way to say that we can accurately retrace those, I think is a little bit, a bit overstepping, I think, in most cases.
Okay. I agree. I've seen Ambon, Sarong, Jaipura, Maluku, all types of localities. And while there is, evidence that there are animals there, the animals in captivity, we don't know exactly where they were sourced from to be able to put that label on. But perhaps, using a name or a location as a name for a certain phenotype that we see could potentially be used. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it's useful that we see it in a lot of the other popular reptiles as well, and it just kind of gets these monikers attached to them, and it may be legit. It might just be we're calling this line this for now, and that's fine. It is a little more specific than classic Indo because, like I said, here we will not take sarong individuals and try to pair them with ambulance. If we find ourselves if we find that we have some that have that look, we'll stop pairing them and not pair them again on that in that regard, just because we're not sure. So we'll just play it safe on that until we know. But yeah, those names you strap on them, it might just be just to keep track of them in the hobby, but not really true locales. So I guess I'm not offended when I see it, but at the same time, is it really from Sarong? Do we know this? Or yeah, there aren't too many INAT uploads from these different islands of blue tongues, and so we can't really go onto these different databases and say, okay, here's the range of diversity we have from this island. Here's the range of diversity from this beach or anything else like that. It's more like you said, they exist here, but the diversity we just don't know yet.
Well, and it's hard because some of the people there, well, and just in general in the world, aren't always the most trustworthy, and without knowing them well, it can be hard if like some random guy contacts you and's like, I got this rare looking one for 20 grand. It's unique. But
yeah, you'll see locales pop up. It's a new locale or a new morph, and for me, it's just if there's not enough evidence to back it up, then it's a neat looking blue tongue, but probably don't have a place for it in our group. If it's too unique looking or too rare, then I probably don't have another one to pair it with, so I'm probably good.
Would you personally hybridize your animals?
No, we've not been a fan of that. I know it's done on a number of different species. Some of them I'm a bit more. Let's see. I'm not a fan of hybrids. Just put it out there. I just don't like them. I don't think they should be done. Personally, I think our gene pools in the hobby are so limited. We don't need to muddy them anymore by forming these hybrids. Even if it's like Easterns and Northerns are probably the same species, just different locales of a single species, unless you'll do the subspecies route. Even in that case, where they're taking the albino Easterns and breeding them with Northerns and the melanocytes and same, not a big fan of that because the gene pool is already so shallow on the animals that we have. Mixing it with these other species is just going to make the problem even worse. And something like the Indonesians, where so few people are breeding them, you take those few captive bred individuals and just throw in a small handful of mutts into that mix. That's going to make it a bit harder to keep these projects going long term. And so I'm somewhat opposed to making hybrids.
and it's kind of been changing, but I kind of foresee it going kind of like you see with the boas, where you're going to have, people that do their pure route, people keep the genetic, and then some people a little bit both ways.
Yeah, you see that with a lot of the really common ones. That's why when I see it with boas, I'm not gonna lose my mind over it when I go and see someone taking a I guess I got to be careful what I say here because I step on some boa people's toes. But say you have an all-white boa that may or may not be from Central or South America, and they start mixing this all-white boa with Central American ones and saying, oh, it's a Central American, it's all the same thing. There's maybe some concern there, but there's enough people breeding boas that are keeping the localities pure that hopefully there's going to be enough boas of those different phenotypes kept pure and away from these mutts and morphs and things like that. With Vranids, you'll see the same thing. People try to hybridize different monitor lizards, but so few people are breeding them that's a bigger issue. There's only a handful of people that are going to be producing these in a year. If you start hybridizing them, there's not going to be much left in the future. So I guess how bummed I get about saying hybrids is somewhat related to how many people are actually working with those species and how much of a population is kept separate from the hybrids. And even if you can tell the hybrids apart. So if you can't tell the hybrid apart, it's kind of a bigger deal because then that can easily slip new genetics into the bloodline that we otherwise would not want.
A little bit off topic, but going back to the monitors thing, I forget how long this may have been, but do you or have you previously worked with tricolors?
Yes, we did. We got some tricolors back in, when would that have been? It was right when I first moved back to Utah. So I think 2008, 2009, I picked up a trio of yearlings and raised them up. Yeah, they were interesting. They were a very they were a monster to work with. I've worked with a lot of monitors, and they were by far one of the trickiest. They swim, they climb, they dig, and they hate you. And so working with them was interesting. So I've had some large croc monitors that, you'd go in the enclosure and you'd have a garbage can lit as a shield because they just didn't like you in there, and they would every once in a while run at you. The 1OI were worse. They were interesting. They were awesome. I can't wait to work with them again, but they were a very interesting monitor to work with. They were a very difficult one to work with.
How large do they get about?
I've heard reports of getting much larger than what mine ever did, but my biggest male was probably maybe, well, I don't want to over exaggerate them. I think it was probably about 4.5, maybe 5 feet, but again, mostly tail.
Yeah.
So about the size of a big blue tail monitor. In fact, a lot of their behavior was kind of like just an overly angry blue tail monitor.
Wow.
Yeah, they're fun.
I'd like some of those, but no room, and realistically, probably not the best for me.
They are probably the worst. Someone's getting mad if they ever hear me say this. They're probably the worst pet monitor to keep. They are a very interesting monitor. They're a beautiful monitor. If they were just nondescript monitor, if they didn't have the bright colors, no one would care about them. But because of those bright colors, they get a whole lot of attention. But they are, as far as monitor keeping goes, they are one of the more challenging ones, and probably the least, I'd say the least recommended monitor of anyone I've ever kept. If you love monitors, then it's a whole different ball game. But if you want a pet monitor, that's not the one to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's the 5-year plan for Great Basin?
So we're actually doing some pretty big changes right now. We're we just got a new building, and we are expanding and setting up some exhibits. So we're going to continue producing animals. We're going to cut down a few of the more common species, but we'll still be breeding quite a bit. But now we're going to set up some exhibits so people can come in and start seeing some of the cool stuff that we work with.
Is that going to be by permit only, like scheduled out times, or like you going to have weekend shows?
It's more of, we will be open during the week, and so you drive on by, pull on in, and come spend a few hours interacting and seeing some pretty cool animals that you'll probably not be able to see anywhere else.
Will you try to get a zoo license?
Say it again, sorry?
Will you try to get like a zoo license? My understanding is some people can get zoo licenses, which kind of opens your accessibility to certain species and connections.
There are a handful of different licenses, different ways of going about it. As far as some of the animals go, we have some pretty nice permits that we're already working with that allows us to keep things like venomous and crocodilians, which is not a common thing in the state. And there's a handful of other permits and license you need on the federal level to get some of the more exotic stuff, and we haven't started some of that work yet. That's kind of, let's get the exhibit set up first, and then we'll worry about some of the more exotic stuff. But as for a lot of the venomous and crocodilians and stuff, those permits are difficult to obtain. But now that we have them, it gives us a little bit of a step forward in getting some of the interesting stuff in there.
Would you go try to get Komodos that big, or not enough room?
If someone wants to donate enough money for me to do so, I'd love to have one. But sadly, I'm not quite in the financial bracket to afford something like that at the time. But that'd be a dream. That's every monitor enthusiast, that's their dream, is to have something like that. So yeah, someday maybe, but that's not in immediate plans.
What is your, going back to the skinks, or which one? Dream, favorite? I'll go with now. Going back to skinks, of all the species that you work with, which one's your favorite one? If you could only have one.
I'm really bad at that. That's why I have hundreds of animals in this facility. When I get asked my favorite animal, it's usually whatever one I'm standing closest to. And since we're talking about blue tongues, I go back to thinking about just how amazed I was when I was just a teenager when I saw my first blue tongue, saw that first northern. This guy was doing a presentation and just kind of plopped just a big old chunky northern right on the table. I was like, that is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And so the northerns will always hold a special place in my heart. I love northerns. I've always been fascinated by them. They're the biggest of the Taliqua skinks. I know the evanescents get about longer, but you get a big bulky 25, 26 inch northern there. That's just a massive, just awesome animal. So northerns are probably, right now I'll say northerns are my favorite. in a few weeks when the Indonesian breeding season starts, maybe I'll say keys are my favorite at that moment. But as of right now, Northerns will always be a special one for me.
Okay. In regards to favorites in dream, like the Komodo, is there a dream if you could have any species that you don't currently have? Which one would it be? It could be anything. It could be literally anything. Just open to whatever your imagination, wherever it takes you.
I still have not had a saltwater croc or a Nile croc. We've had a couple hybrids come through that were confiscated. We were holding for a bit till they got shipped off to different facilities. But I would love to, if not this next building, we won't have enough space. But once we move to a larger building after that, I would love to have a Nile or a Salty on display.
Gigantic.
Yes.
And
those were always, when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a crocodile biologist. So what I tell people when I was, in elementary school, that's what I'm going to grow up and be. So crocs have always been something I've been fascinated by. And so someday.
Is there a dream like skink species, perhaps like pygmies and shingles, anything? Australians?
Pygmies are neat and all, but they spend so much time in their little burrows that I'd love to get shinglebacks. That would be, in fact, I would hopefully in the next couple of years we'll have shinglebacks because that's kind of a high priority for us. Shinglebacks and actually westerns. I still don't have westerns, and I don't know why. I think every time they come available, I've got something else going on. But westerns and shinglebacks, as far as skinks go, those are kind of realistic priorities in the near future. Those are the ones that I'm really looking for. Would love to get my hands on some shinglebacks. Just those are a little bit trickier because again, the U.S. hobby, some of the stuff that's trickled in the last few years is a bit questionable, and so we're just avoiding that stuff. So I guess I should say shinglebacks with known origins is what I'm looking for. So legally acquired shinglebacks are what I'm hoping to have added to our collection in the next little while.
I know there's been a bit that have come legally. Where they were before that, you never know, is the hard part, I think.
Yeah, it's tricky. When I got back from Australia, when did I go there? Was that 2013, 2014? I was down in Western Australia for a bit, and we were finding like every street you turned down, there were shinglebacks. They were just like rabbits on the road. There's so many of them. And I was taking pictures, we were in Goldfields and taking pictures of the Goldfield shinglebacks. And by the time I got back, I posted some of the field pics up on our social media, up on our Facebook page. And I had people contacting me saying, hey, I've got some that look just like that, with pictures of goldfields and stuff that they're trying to sell. But again, it's they say they're zoo acquired, but then you ask, okay, which zoo? And then it just the trail gets pretty cold pretty quick. So it's a bummer. There's some that are floating in that did get into the States legally, but yeah, when you start finding out where they originated from, it gets a little bit some gray areas pop up, and so we just avoiding that.
That being said, though, there were people breeding them before that have got those in the good hands, so there is still hope for the future.
Oh, yeah. There's a handful of people that are legally keeping them, legally producing them, and I'm pretty excited about that. So we're just kind of biding our time and trying to get one of those when the time's right. Yeah, they're not. From talking to some zookeepers that have kept them in the past, they say they're not that difficult to produce once you get a good pair going. But a lot of people that had them in the past, just zoos and stuff that were working with them, just stopped and just got involved in other projects. And so a lot of the captive bred stuff within the States is just harder to come by. But yeah, there are out there. There are some out there that are good to go, that are not of questionable origin.
Was there any more questions you had, Jeremy?
No. Questions?
Well, I wanted to thank you for coming on. I appreciate you giving us your time. And you have a great rest of your night, and look forward to see what you got produced with your keys down the road. I always like those. I don't have any yet.
You should get some. I know someone has some captive bred babies right now. Just saying.
Yep, and yeah, I know if anyone's looking for Indos, you got a bid up for available.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you guys again, and you guys have a great rest of your night.